Everywhere you look right now, you hear the same phrase: masculinity is in crisis. Turn on the news, masculinity is the problem. Scroll social media, masculinity is dangerous. Listen to certain podcasts, masculinity is under attack. And depending on who you ask, men are either too aggressive, too soft, too absent, too emotional, not emotional enough. It's like nobody agrees on what masculinity even is anymore. But here's what I've noticed. Most conversations about the masculinity crisis are loud, but they're shallow. We argue about behavior, we argue about culture, we argue about gender roles, but very few people ask the deeper question: what if the crisis isn't masculinity itself? What if the crisis is formation? What if the problem isn't that men are too masculine, but that men are unformed, undisciplined, undirected, spiritually untethered? Because raw strength without direction doesn't become leadership, it becomes chaos. And emotion without discipline doesn't become empathy, it becomes instability. So maybe the crisis isn't that men want to be strong. Maybe the crisis is that no one taught men how to become strong the right way. And that's a very different conversation.
The masculinity crisis is not a crisis of power. It is a crisis of formation.
Let me slow this down and tell you what crisis really looked like for me. It didn't look dramatic. It looked normal. That's the dangerous part. I wasn't in handcuffs. I wasn't in the headlines. I wasn't even failing publicly. But inside, I was drifting. I grew up hearing something over and over again. Because you're black, because you're from the ghetto, because of where you come from, you won't amount to much. Sometimes it was subtle. Sometimes it was blunt. One phrase that stuck with me, and I can still hear it: you'll probably be dead or in jail before you're 24. Now imagine being a teenager and hearing that. Imagine hearing it enough times that it doesn't even shock you anymore. It just settles in. If you hear a lie long enough, it starts to feel like destiny. And when a young man doesn't believe he has a future, he stops building one. I wasn't building, I was reacting. I drank more than I should have. Not because I loved alcohol, but because it numbed the pressure. I chased girls, not because I was confident, but because attention felt like proof that I mattered. I was angry, but I didn't call it anger. I called it being real. I called it not tolerating disrespect. But the truth, I was carrying frustration I didn't know how to process. Frustration about expectations. Frustration about identity. Frustration about not believing I could become anything different. And here's what nobody tells young men. When you don't believe in your future, you sabotage your present. You stop disciplining yourself. You stop preparing. You stop dreaming responsibly. You live day to day. You react emotionally. You waste potential quietly. I wasn't evil. I wasn't hopeless. I was unformed. Power without direction. Emotion without discipline. Strength without structure. And spiritually, disconnected. I believed what culture said about me more than what God said about me. I believed statistics more than scripture. And when a man believes the wrong story about himself, he starts acting it out. That was my crisis. Not masculinity, misguided masculinity, untrained masculinity. A man who had energy, but no compass. And if nobody interrupts that trajectory, that man becomes exactly what he was warned he would be.
A man in crisis is not always weak. He is often unformed, powerful, but without direction.
Now here's the part that changed everything. It wasn't one lightning moment. It was a shift in environment and a shift in influence. First, I got out of my environment, not because I was running, but because I realized something powerful. You cannot grow into a new man while surrounded by people committed to your old identity. Then came mentors, real men. John Jordan, my United Way big brother, a man who gave his time when he didn't have to. My Boy Scout scoutmaster, steady, structured, disciplined. And later in the military, leaders who modeled competence, accountability, and composure. They weren't perfect, but they were formed. They showed me something I had never consistently seen: masculinity anchored in discipline. And here's what I tell men now. If you don't have a mentor, find one. If you don't have a father figure, find an example. If you don't have family guidance, find structure. Read biographies, join environments that demand growth. Submit to places that stretch you, because isolation preserves crisis. Formation requires influence. And then there was scripture. I stopped believing what people predicted and started believing what God promised. Jeremiah 29:11 stopped being a coffee mug verse. It became identity. I began to see myself differently, not as a statistic, but as a steward. And when a man changes what he believes about himself, everything begins to change.
Environment shapes direction. Mentorship shapes discipline. Scripture shapes identity.
Here's the first thing nobody likes to hear. You don't fix crisis by adding motivation. You fix crisis by subtracting sabotage. Before I built anything meaningful, I had to stop destroying my own future. And for me, that meant very practical things. I stopped drinking, not because I hated alcohol, but because I realized something. It's hard to build a future when you're numbing the present. I stopped chasing women, not because women are bad, but because attention is not identity. And if you need constant validation to feel valuable, you'll never develop real confidence. I stopped living for the weekend, stopped wasting energy trying to impress people who weren't building anything themselves. Here's what I learned. Crisis continues as long as comfort continues. You cannot grow into a disciplined man while protecting undisciplined habits. A lot of men want transformation, but they won't let go of the things feeding their dysfunction. The masculinity crisis isn't just cultural, it's personal. And until a man says, "This behavior ends with me," nothing changes. You don't need more hype. You need subtraction. Remove the habits that sabotage your clarity. Remove the environment that reinforces your weakness. Remove the patterns that keep you small. That's step one. Not glamorous, but foundational.
Transformation begins not with addition, but with elimination.
Once I stopped sabotaging myself, something unexpected happened. I had space to build. And that's when discipline entered the picture. Not motivation, discipline. I started exercising consistently, not to look impressive, but to prove something to myself. I can keep promises to myself. I started waking up earlier, reading, studying, learning. I committed to improving, even when nobody was watching. Here's what most men misunderstand. Discipline is not punishment, it's structure. And structure creates confidence. Every time you do something hard on purpose, you teach your mind that you are capable. Crisis shrinks when consistency grows. You don't feel like working out every day. You don't feel like reading scripture every morning. You don't feel like improving your skills after a long shift. But feelings are not authority. Discipline is. And slowly, something shifts. You begin to see yourself differently, not as a victim of circumstance, but as an architect of your future. And that changes everything.
Discipline forms the man that emotion cannot.
Here's where most transformation conversations stop. They talk discipline, they talk habits, they talk productivity, but they skip the foundation. For me, scripture wasn't decoration, it was direction. I stopped reading the Bible as inspiration and started reading it as instruction. Identity shifted first. I was no longer the product of my environment. I was accountable to God. That changes how you walk. It changes how you think. It changes how you lead. Because discipline without spiritual foundation becomes ego. Direction without faith becomes anxiety. Success without grounding becomes pride. The Bible didn't just motivate me, it corrected me, confronted me, anchored me. It gave me standards higher than culture. And when your identity is rooted in something eternal, you stop living like you're temporary. That's when masculinity stabilizes, not in noise, not in reaction, but in conviction. The crisis isn't that men are too masculine. The crisis is that men are spiritually rootless. And rootless men drift. Rooted men build.
Eliminate sabotage. Build discipline. Anchor in faith. Formation replaces crisis.
Let me leave you with this. The masculinity crisis is real, but it's not what you think. It's not that men want to lead. It's not that men desire strength. It's not that men feel anger or ambition or drive. The crisis is this: men with power, but no formation. Men with emotion, but no discipline. Men with potential, but no direction. And here's the truth I learned the hard way. No one is coming to rescue you. No one is going to form you by accident. You either drift into the statistics or you build yourself into something different. I wasn't destined to be a statistic, and neither are you. But destiny doesn't change behavior. Decisions do. It took me 2 years to become unrecognizable from who I was. 2 years of saying no to sabotage. 2 years of building discipline. 2 years of anchoring myself in faith. And I'm still growing. Because formation doesn't stop. It matures. A man in crisis blames the world. A formed man builds anyway. He builds his body. He builds his mind. He builds his faith. He builds his family. He builds his future. If you feel like you're in crisis right now, good. That means you're aware. Now eliminate what's weakening you. Build what strengthens you. Root yourself in something eternal and start forming yourself into the man you were meant to be. Not loud, not reckless, not reactive, but disciplined, directed, rooted. That's not toxic masculinity. That's legacy.
The masculinity crisis ends where formation begins. Become the man you were designed to be.